Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Post with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam, folks. I'm so excited today to be once again joined by my friend Stephen Newman. Stephen's a technical writer in the Northern Virginia area. We know each other because we overlapped at Virginia Tech. He's the class of 2018. He also writes on freelance for Dulles District and has his own website as well, the Capital Newsman. He's been a frequent guest during baseball season, like me, a fellow huge Nats fan. So it's always exciting to bring them on and especially talk the Nats, recapping their season, of course, previewing the MLB playoffs. Stephen, it's so great for you to join me today.
Glad to be here as always. Glad to keep our tradition going here.
For sure. Well, let's get right to it. The MLB playoffs are right on the cusp. They'll start on Tuesday, October 3rd. First of all, before we get to the playoffs, Stephen, I wanted to recap this MLB season. It's hard to believe we're already at the end of the regular season. I mean, it seems like just yesterday, me and you were previewing the Nats season upcoming in March. But, you look at this MLB season, of course, the biggest change, of course, was the pitch clock. I think it's safe to say it was a huge success. The average time of games went down. I think it was like 2 hours, 45 minutes. Saw Bob Nightingale, the great baseball writer, tweet out that the MLB drew 70 million more fans this year, which is the biggest increase in 30 years. I mean, you could just notice even going to the game, it seemed like you really didn't have a lot of chance for kind of chit chat, which, in pre-pitch clock times, that was kind of the case. You talk to someone and you're kind of not focusing on the game. All of a sudden, 2-3 pitches, a couple outs might have even gone by. So I think overall it was a success. What about you? What do you think about how the pitch clock was implemented this season?
Yeah, I completely agree. I know we talked about it before the season started, just about the rule changes, how we were feeling about it. I think we were both on board with it then, but now that it's played out, especially like you see it, you cut off close to half an hour of every game, all the downtime goes away, and to your point, like I think for your diehard fans, it may not be as big a deal because they're going to tune in no matter what. But the more casual viewers, you start bringing in a lot more of them just because there's so much less downtime. The games are quicker. It's just so much more manageable to watch a game, go to a game, anything like that. It's you can't. There's really no debate having seen it played out. It definitely. I mean, change. The MLB obviously hates change, but in this case, I think even they would say that without a doubt, it was a great fix. It's really improved the game. It's made it a lot more fun. There's some other rules as well that we might talk about. But yeah, I think overall, really all the changes that were made, I think, are rousing success as far as the rules go.
And you look at some of the big storylines, of course, as you recap the regular season. Luis Arias from the Marlins won his second straight batting title, and the Marlins themselves made the playoffs, which is, of course, pretty impressive. And how about the dominance from the Braves? I mean, league leaders in so many categories, wins, 104 wins. Matt Olson led the league in both home runs and RBIs, 54 and 139. Spencer Strider won the most games out of any pitcher, 20 wins on the season. Ronald Acuna Jr., 217 hits. He also led the majors with 73 stolen bases. He's the favorite right now for the NL MVP odds. And Shohei Ohtani, another spectacular season. Unfortunately, he had to kind of stop pitching at the end of the year because he had to deal with Tommy John surgery. But Ohtani in the AL, Acuna in the NL, the favorite in terms of MVP odds. So as you recap this MLB season, are there any key storylines that really stand out to you? I was also going to mention the Baltimore Orioles won 101 games. We, of course, know a lot of Oriole fans in the Northern Virginia area, and the Dodgers, again, won 100 games. So those are your three 100 victory teams. But what stands out to you as you look back on this 2023 regular season?
Yeah, well, obviously the Orioles are a big one, a team that I mean, for a long time hasn't had a really big season, but even the past handful of years, especially, they're in the basement of the league every year. And then all of a sudden, I mean, you saw it a bit down the stretch last year as well, but this year especially, all that young talent they have, especially in the lineup, Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, all of them. That's been a really fun team to watch, and a team that obviously they've positioned themselves well to potentially make a run in the playoffs as well. You got stories like the Mets collapsing again. I think we both picked them to win the World
Yeah.
Series, actually. They didn't get a whole lot out of Scherzer. Verlander didn't do a ton either, and he winds up getting traded. They both got traded. It just the team as a whole just fell flat all season, really. You talked about Acuna. The 40 homers, 70 stolen bases too. We haven't seen a stolen base season like that in so long. Um, it's funny that the debate that was raging on for a few years here, Juan Soto versus Ronald Acuna Jr. I think Acuna came out on top this year. It's safe to say, and the Nats even they reaped the rewards of getting rid of Soto, which we'll probably talk about as well. The Luis Arias season, second half he didn't hit as well, but first half of the year, the race towards potentially batting 400, that was really fun as well. And you got other things like to a lesser extent, the maybe the light version of Acuna and a Corbin Carroll, who might wind up winning Rookie of the Year. You talk about Strider, although he faded down the stretch. Every year there are tons of great stories in the MLB though. Ohtani as well, like you said, even though he wound up getting shut down, which will also be a big story this offseason, I'm sure. Yeah, but much like every year, and maybe even more so this year with the like Acuna and the like, just a lot of great storylines throughout the season to follow. Made it so it's a fun season, and you talked about it. It's the postseason's great, but it just seeing the season wind down. It's always bittersweet once you get to the playoffs.
For sure, and you mentioned it. We both picked the Mets to win the World Series, so clearly we knew what we were talking about at the beginning of the season. What would you say is the biggest disappointment? Because you have, of course, the Mets. You talk about the Yankees. I mean, they didn't make the playoffs. Their worst record in years. Aaron Boone's probably on the hot seat, if not going to get canned. The Padres, I mean, they spent all this money. Xander Bogaerts, Juan Soto, Manny Machado, and so on and so forth. They don't make the playoffs. The Cardinals took a big drop off. I mean, we knew it was going to be a bit of an adjustment with the leadership, such as Yadier Molina and Albert Pujols not in the clubhouse. But, I mean, for them to be almost on par with the Nats, I think no one really expected. So, of those three teams and any others that I didn't mention, is there one that stands out to say, man, this was a really disappointing season for this team?
Yeah, those are all good ones. To me, I feel like it's the Mets. You talk about the top of the rotation. Yeah, I get it. Scherzer and Verlander are up there in age at this point, but I mean the lineup looked like it'd be really good. Obviously, you've got those two leading your rotation. Buck Showalter is the manager as well. That's a guy I know that we both certainly believe in as a manager. The Padres are definitely a good one too. Because I mean, once they were already strong, then you add Soto, you would have thought. Like I know I picked them to win the division over the Dodgers too. Even the Cardinals, I think I picked to win the division. So you got some really good options there. The Yankees, but to me, it's the Mets. Like I talked about the rotation, the lineup. I mean, Steve Cohen can spend whatever he wants, go after trade for whatever he wants, and they never got going this season. To the point that down the stretch pretty late in the year, the Nats were right there in the standings with the Mets. It's just wild to think about. So yeah, I would say the Mets for me.
I agree with you because the Mets won 101 games last year. We kind of felt like they were neck and neck with the Braves, whereas the Padres, they really overachieved. I mean, they made the playoffs of 88 wins and then upset the Dodgers. So to me, obviously, it's disappointing for them too. But I think there were more expectations that the Mets could win it all than there were the Padres. So I agree with you there. I'm going with the New York Mets. Well, let's get to our favorite team, Stephen, the Washington Nationals. 71-91 on the season, a 16-game improvement from last year. I do want to say for the record, I did say the Nats would win 70 games. They barely got there because, I know me and you were texting about it. I wasn't sure if they were going to get there with the way they kind of finished the end of the season, and they were playing a lot of tough opponents, but they did get to 71 wins, a nice win against the Braves, who are considered one of the favorites to win it all in that last game of the season. The Scrappy Nats, as Bob Carpenter, the TV announcer, would often call them. I was just kind of looking, Stephen, at recapping some of the team leaders, key storylines. Lane Thomas probably you could, I think, make a very solid argument. He was the best player all season long, 28 home runs, 86 RBIs. Joey Meneses, 13 home runs, 89 RBI. CJ Abrams, 18 home runs, 47 stolen bases, broke Trey Turner's single season team record, and he was only caught stealing 4 times. So, I mean, he was incredibly efficient with that. Really felt like he took a step forward this year. Keibert Ruiz, 18 home runs, 46 RBIs. You kind of had young guys throughout the season, guys like Jake Alou, Jacob Young, Stone Garrett, Alex Call really have their moments. So you felt like you had a good nucleus there. Jamer Candelario, before he was traded, he was probably, I mean, 1-2 punch right there with Lane Thomas. So he had a solid season while he was with the Nationals. Pitching wise, Josiah Gray, Nats only All-Star, 8-13, 3.91 ERA. Patrick Corbin, 10-15. I mean, he had a lot of losses, but 10 wins considering what he did last year. I think you take anything as an improvement there. Mackenzie Gore, 7-10, 151 Ks to lead the team. Kyle Finnegan, surprised he wasn't traded at the deadline, but had a really great season as a closer, 28 for 36. I think I was looking at Mark Zuckerman, one of his tweets, saying that the Nationals only had 8 starting pitchers all year. So I think that's a win for them to not only keep the young guys like Gore and Gray healthy, but just to kind of keep some continuity in their rotation. So I said a lot there, Stephen. Let's go to, I guess, to the position players first. What stands out to you about how those guys did offensively this season?
So I think the easy answer there, just as far as who out of the position players had the best season, I think would be Lane Thomas, to your point. He had a strong case to be an all-star this year. They wound up going Josiah Gray, but Lane Thomas was right there, and Candelario, until he was traded as well, he was kind of in that mix too. Seeing him kind of back up what he's back up what he's done these first couple years, the Nats had him. He faded a little last year. This year he was pretty strong, although he did fade a little down the stretch, I will say. He wound up hitting in the 260s when he was flirting with 300 the first half and change of the season. I would say I'd probably say Lane Thomas of the position players had the best season. I think the most encouraging going forward is probably CJ Abrams. He didn't have a great season at the plate. He hit below 250, I think. Decent number of home runs, but the stolen bases, he didn't really even get going the first half of the season. It wasn't until around the All-Star break, and then he was just automatic. Anytime he gets on base, you're watching, because you feel like anytime he's going to steal a base. He stole a couple of bases the last game of the season to tie and then break Trey Turner's single season record. The dude is, I mean, he's freakish on the bases. I mean, the sky's the limit. Like I said, like he didn't really do much of that at all in the first half of the season. You get him out of the gates running like that in a full season. I mean, he could be right there with Acuna in stolen bases. It's pretty nuts. And I mean, even defensively too, I thought he took a major step forward there as well. He was making, even last year, like you could see that he had the athleticism, the raw tools to make the plays he needed to make out there at shortstop. He was a lot more consistent this year. And I think that also went a long way. Honestly, I think Dominic Smith played a part in that. As much as he was terrible at the plate, he was a real good glove at first base, so that did help a bit. But you saw that. I think that also helped, like Luis Garcia at second, although he's kind of up and down from the minors. But defense was never really an issue, I didn't think there. Yeah, the infield defense in general, I thought was a lot better. And I think a lot of that is just because CJ Abrams was so solid there at shortstop. And like I said, the stolen bases as well. The hits, I think, will come. You saw that in spurts, he does have power in that bat too. That was a little bit of a concern, just because of he's a smaller, thinner guy. You don't know that if he really has that grown man strength yet, but and frankly, he kind of doesn't, which is also what's so exciting about it, is that he can hit 15, 20 without any of that, adds some strength to that frame. He could be a 20, 25 home run guy with 50, 60, whatever stolen bases, playing a real good shortstop. It's really exciting. And that's, again, that's a big deal in that Juan Soto trade. You need players like that, even if you don't get a superstar like Soto, to get some guys that multiple young guys that can kind of fill that void, I think was really important. So yeah, to me, like I said, I think Lane Thomas probably had the best season of the hitters, but I'm probably more excited about Abrams.
Were you surprised? Because I know we didn't do a show around the trade deadline this year, but were you surprised that Lane Thomas was not traded at the trade deadline? I mean, I was remember reading stuff that the Nats were kind of thinking this is a starting outfielder, everyday type of guy, whereas a lot of the teams they were talking to really thought he was a fourth outfielder. They end up not trading him. He has the best season of his career, but then you also think about the prospects coming up, guys like Dylan Cruz and Elijah Wood and all the outfielders that you have in the system. So, were you surprised at all that Lane Thomas was not traded? And what do you think is the future of his future status with the team?
Yeah, I was. I kind of expected. I don't know if I even expected him to get traded as much as I felt like they just should trade him, just because, to your point, he was having such a great season early in the year, and you have those guys there that were coming. You didn't have, well, by that point you had Dylan Cruz, but up until shortly before the trade deadline, you didn't. But I mean, that James Wood, Robert Hassel, although he didn't hit super great in the minors, but you've got tons of outfielders there, and it kind of felt like that's the strength of the team coming up through the minors. So maybe you trade him. I think something that I overlooked though a little bit is one, you do have a known commodity there, a veteran leader of that group, which I do think is important, especially when those guys first come up. I think just having somebody there that can kind of show them the ropes a little bit as they're kind of getting acclimated. But even beyond that, I think there wasn't really a reason to rush a Lane Thomas trade. Um, you do have to believe on it a little bit that he can have a similar season, say next year, that he did this year. But I mean, he's shown himself well at the plate. I think there's reason to believe that even if it's not quite as good, he can have a solid season. And if you need to trade him at that point, you trade him then, and he'll still have value then too. He'll still have a year or two of control that another team could pick up. Like there was really no reason to rush it. So and you do also just need a bat to keep the fans interested in coming to games, frankly, while the team wasn't doing super well. So I did kind of think they should have traded him, but looking back, I don't think it was a bad decision. I think maybe they did view him a little higher than the rest of the market did. Like you said, they're looking at it as more of a platoon fourth outfielder kind of guy, whereas the Nats thought he was a starter, maybe even all-star type player. So we'll see kind of what comes of that if they kind of change their stance on it when it becomes maybe a better time to trade him. But yeah, I think in the end it is probably a good decision to not trade him. I think there's definitely a presence he has in the lineup and a leadership role also that you could take on with the younger guys once that time comes.
And then, of course, I mentioned the pitchers. I mean, Gray and Gore, your cornerstones for the future, hopefully. Patrick Corbin, Kyle Finnegan, another guy maybe you thought, could get traded, but maybe he's cementing himself as kind of that next solid Nats closer. So you look at this rotation, I thought overall relatively healthy. I know Gore kind of had his separate stints dealing with minor things, but nothing too serious. But what are your thoughts on how the rotation did this year, led by the Nats' only all-star, Josiah Gray?
Yeah, Josiah Gray was a little funny to me because even when he was an all-star, some of the peripheral numbers weren't as great. So it was kind of, can he really sustain this? And then it turned out second half he kind of didn't. All that said, though, like I think it was definitely a step in the right direction for him. He had an ERA under 4, which compared to what it had been his first couple of years in DC, you definitely take. I mean, the guy can definitely pitch. The question to me is more of, is he like a number 3 starter, or can he be a more front of the rotation guy? But I think it's pretty clear at this point that he belongs in a starting rotation. He's not a back of the rotation guy either. He's a legitimate piece of the rebuild. It's just a matter of maybe can he take that next step. But definitely the step he took this year was a very important one. As far as Mackenzie Gore goes, to me it felt like, and I don't know if you feel the same way, that his best starts this season were probably among the best starts that any starting pitcher has had in the rotation. There were some hiccups in there as well. He kind of struggled with command at times, but just as far as the overall presence, his stuff, he to me is the guy more so than Gray that really feels like could become that ace starting pitcher. Now, like I said, he's still got to be a little more consistent. He's got to also stay available because he's had injury issues. I mean, pretty much every year of his pro career at this point. But the fact of the matter is, to me, he's got dominant stuff. Doing it from the left side as well is a big thing. He's definitely had been better in that area than Patrick Corbin, like you said. Even though he did get 10 wins this year. And then beyond that, you've got guys also like a Jake Irvin. Jake Irvin had a real solid year too. I was actually looking recently. So like early in the year, he was okay, whatever. He then he got a start or two skipped, I remember, and his last 2022 something like that starts, he had an ERA below 4. And I don't think he's a guy that anybody really saw as a piece in anything really, but I mean, shoot, 20 plus starts, ERA under 4, a young guy, they can keep him around for a long time. Like I think going, if nothing else, he's a starter in the rotation going into the next season. But I think maybe he's a piece as well. And then you have Jackson Rutledge, who maybe we'll talk about. Up and down. He's been a highly touted prospect, though. He made his debut, and he showed some things as well. And even a Kate Cavalli will be back next year at some point. So, I mean, as far as the starting rotation goes, I think you're really starting to see there are some dark years for a couple years in the rotation, but the future is rapidly approaching with guys that do have some real upside, and I don't know if they'll be as good as the rotations that the Nats had when they were really rolling with whether it's Scherzer, Strasburg, the Jordan Zimmerman, Gio Gonzalez, you name it, those types of guys. I don't know if you necessarily have all of that, but you could have a real solid starting rotation again, and that's something that is definitely worth looking forward to. It would really, I think there's a chance. I do that they have a really strong rotation, kind of led by the Gray, Gore, and some of those other younger guys as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I think just an overall thought. This was one of my favorite seasons, favorite teams to watch. I mean, again, the expectations weren't great, but just with how entertaining they were, they played hard. They had their stretches where they lost a handful of games in a row, but I just thought overall the effort, the kind of energy that this young team had made this team watchable and fun to watch. I mean, I don't think you could say the same thing for last year. And because of that kind of improvement that they made, Stephen, Nationals announced that Davey Martinez and Mike Rizzo have signed to 2-year extensions. I know me and you have talked about Davey in the past, where you look at the grand scope of his resume, except for the year they won the World Series, and even that year they didn't start off great. 19-31, we all remember on May 24th. He's been at best a 500 manager, and at worst a not too great of a manager in terms of records. But obviously, we didn't come into this year thinking that the Nats would make the playoffs, but hoping to make some improvement. And I think in many people's eyes, they made tremendous improvements. So again, you look at it, 71-91, Rizzo and Davey extended. What are your thoughts about that? It seems like the learners, however long they're the owners of the team, are at least willing to commit to those two guys in the general manager and manager positions.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is a big part of it, just where kind of the ownership thing stands. It's the longer they kind of play this out with Rizzo and Davey, the more I feel like they know they want to sell. They're just kind of holding out. As far as just we'll start with Davey. I know we kind of share the opinion, like you said, that he hasn't had a ton of success. He'd had the year in 19, and even that was kind of incomplete. And the rest has been 500 at best. I think what it really comes down to is he's just how the players feel about him in the clubhouse. The reality is this team isn't, at least for the time being, like they're not a playoff contender or anything like that. And it's really about just keeping morale up while the team goes through some struggles and is kind of learning on the job. And I do think he's good at things like that. Now I do think if you want to go deeper into like hitting coach, pitching coach, stuff like that, I think there are changes that need to be made because, I mean, the results kind of speak for themselves. Pitching hasn't been great. Hitting is kind of they hit okay, like they as far as batting average goes, but they lack more of the modern day, I guess, 3 true outcomes type of hitting, where it's maybe you strike out some, but the idea is get on base however, and then really the upside with the home runs. They don't really have a lot of that. But yeah, I think with Davey, it really just comes down to a lot of it's just how the players feel about him, and he's a great guy. And I think for now that's okay. Once the team starts getting better, I think we can start having those conversations again about whether maybe there's a more, I don't even know if I can say more veteran guy at this point, because Davey's been around for a while, but somebody with more of a track record of getting teams over the top in the playoffs. We can have that conversation at that point, but I think for now, Davey works. As far as Rizzo goes, that's an interesting one to me, because he's we all kind of know that as far as like with trades, I think he's done well by and large throughout his time with the Nats. Drafting has been a bit more of a struggle, as is the player development side of things. I think maybe he may have actually redeemed himself a little bit with kind of just the way that this since the Soto trade even. Now you've got a CJ Abrams looking like something, a Mackenzie Gore, and kind of it does seem like they've drafted a little better too this last year or two. So maybe he may have been on the hot seat, even just in the eyes of the learners. But I feel like he's done enough in this rebuild to kind of earn. I mean, I don't even know if I can say a second chance. Like, he's been around so long now that it's like at a certain point, like, it's funny, like the Nats are kind of so in the tank, and yet he's, I forget if it's maybe like the third longest tenured general manager or something like that in all of baseball. It's kind of crazy to think about, but I mean, the results, I don't know if I can say they speak for themselves, but I mean, he's done well enough, I feel like, especially on the trades that I feel like all of that, the continuity with Davey, and again, kind of the overall thinking upward of just what the learners want to do as far as the sale as well. Keeping that continuity as long as it's going well enough, I think, was probably the way they had to go. We'll see how that plays out over time, whether the learners ever do sell and whether the results keep going the direction that they should be. But for now, I think it makes enough sense to keep Rizzo and Davey around.
Yeah, and speaking of power, I mean, they will have to find something in the offseason, because they were last in the NL in home runs. So that's certainly an area that could see improvement for sure. And you mentioned it, Stephen, briefly, the top prospects that the Nationals have. I mean, it just makes you get excited for the future. Dylan Cruz, James Wood, Brady House, Cade Cavalli. He's been in the majors, but he's been hurt, and we really want to see him at kind of a stretch here with the big league team. Elijah Green. So I guess the question for you is, when can we expect to see him in the big leagues? Would it be sometime next year? Is opening day 2024 a bit of a stretch? I mean, I imagine most of these guys will be invited to the spring training big league camp, but do you think 2024 is realistic? And when in 24 do you think that could happen?
I think 2024 is realistic. To your point, I think opening day is probably a stretch. I agree that a lot of those big name guys, I do think will definitely be in spring training, whether it's a James Wood, Dylan Cruz, even though, I mean, the dude hasn't even played a full season in the minors yet, but I mean, he's just that good. He'll be there. I think you'll probably see like a Robert Hassel. You won't see Cade Cavalli just because he's still coming back from his injury. But he'll be back in the majors. Probably as soon as he's healthy, I think, although there's probably a case for starting him in AAA. But he'll be back in 2024 for sure. A Jackson Rutledge again, he'll be in that mix as well. I would say maybe starting with like Wood and Cruz, because those are probably the most exciting guys. I would say in Wood's case, I'd probably start him this season in AAA. He did well enough in AA. With Cruz, you might even keep him in AA to start the year. But with the thought that at some point, whether it's mid-season or August, September, something like that, to have him in the majors. For James Wood, it's really like I don't think he'll start the year in the majors. It's really just going to come down to, I mean, if he starts the year in AAA red hot, and I mean, there's going to be room for him on the Nationals, unless they do something crazy in free agency that I don't really expect. There's going to be a spot for him. So if he's hitting as well as he did to start this year, they're not going to be able to keep him down. Like you could see him within a couple weeks to a month potentially if he's really hitting that well. If it's not as great, they'll probably wait until the All-Star break, even later. Especially, I mean, we'll see what happens with Lane Thomas. Like we said, at that point, if Lane Thomas is gone, then I think they probably have to call Wood up. But yeah, it's really going to depend on just how well he does. I think they'll manipulate the whole service time game just enough. But I think in Wood's case, it'll probably be. I'm thinking the first half of the season. With Cruz, you're probably talking later in the year. Cavalli just depends on how his recovery is going injury wise. Jackson Rutledge will probably be up some point early in the year. I feel like he'll probably start in AAA, but he'll probably be the first guy up in the minor leagues whenever they happen to need a guy. Yeah, I think there are a lot of guys that you're going to see in 2024, even like a Robert Hassel, if he bounces back next year. He'll be in the Arizona Fall League as well. It actually just started today. So if he can start to bounce back from his hamate surgery, that was actually a big deal with him this year too. I think a lot of his struggles were kind of coming back from that. I don't think that was necessarily discussed a whole lot. You just kind of saw the results weren't great, but I think that is a lot of it. So if he bounces back, then he's in that mix as well. A guy like Elijah Green, I think you mentioned, is a little further down the road. But aside from that, I think all those guys could be up real soon. There's another guy like a infielder, Trey Lipscomb. You talked about Brady House too. Brady House will probably be not super early. I could see him around the All-Star break potentially, but not sooner than that. But yeah, like I said, Trey Lipscomb, a college guy as well, but he had a really good year in high AA. I think he's already kind of knocking on the door. I think he could be another guy that comes up around midseason. So a lot of guys. It'll be a lot of new faces, but guys with real potential, I think. And that's an exciting thing to think about for the Nats as they kind of start to really battle towards being a real competitive team, more than just the scrappy Nats like we were talking about. I think you'll see you'll start hearing a lot of those names at some point this year.
So what's a realistic improvement for next year? I mean, obviously 71 wins, you'd like to see them go over 71 wins. Is it 500? I mean, 81. And then I guess the natural question after that is, when do you think is a realistic year that we can see the team in the playoffs again? I know you've mentioned previously 24, 25, maybe a little bit early, but then again, I mean, we saw the improvement this year. So what do you think? Realistic improvement for next year record-wise, and following that, what's the realistic time frame for the team to be back in the postseason?
I think the 81 win mark is probably about right. That might be a smidge optimistic, but it's somewhere in that range, the high 70s to 80, 81, 82 wins. Somewhere in there, I think, is probably what you're talking about. Beyond that, I mean, so I mean, that obviously goes to show that I don't think they're a playoff team next year. I think that they definitely continue their ascent, but I don't think they're really in the hunt to be a playoff team. Unless they spend this offseason, which again I kind of have my doubts about. But if they do, that could change the conversation. I think. I mean, potentially. I mean, you've seen it with the Orioles. They had a bunch of young guys come up, and it clicked really quick. So, I mean, you could be talking like 2025 when they could be at least in the mix for a wild card or something like that. The reality is they are in a tough division too. Like that does make it tough to really contend for the division and to go on a real run in the playoffs. Like the Braves aren't going anywhere. The Phillies probably aren't going anywhere either. The Mets will see. But yeah, I think by even next year, I think they will be more than just a scrappy team. I think they will be a legitimately pretty solid team. And then in 2025, I think is when you're talking about, depending on how things break and if they spend a buck or two, when they could maybe be a playoff team. I think 2025 is really the target year for that.
A couple of key Nationals legends also retired: Sean Doolittle and Steven Strasburg. Doolittle was hurt the last couple of years, and so you kind of figured, he was bouncing around minor league deals. You kind of figured he was probably going to wrap it up soon. Steven Strasburg, we knew it was going to come eventually, but still, it's kind of sad the way it ended. I mean, he really hadn't pitched since 2020, a few starts in 2021, and hadn't pitched at all the last 2 years. So obviously, we talked about it last time. In hindsight, probably not the best idea that the Nats gave him that huge contract extension after the World Series. But of course, Nats fans can always thank him and Doolittle for that World Series championship. So I guess as you reflect on both of those guys retiring, what do you kind of reflect on as you think about their careers and their contributions to the Nationals?
Yeah, it's easy in the moment here to look at the Strasburg thing and be like, well, they shouldn't have paid him. I mean, he'd had injury history. What were they thinking? Why would you do that? But the reality is that there were a lot of really, really good moments with him. I mean, starting with his first start he ever made in the majors. I mean, that was a appointment television. Every baseball fan across the country was tuned into that. And I mean, he was dominant from really the moment he first stepped on a big league mound. And it stinks that he had the injuries he did, that he couldn't have a longer career, because I mean, when he was on, he was one of the best starting pitchers in the majors. And I think that's the thing. As bad as it ended, that's the thing that I think fans should really focus on, because I mean, to diminish that really is unfair to the player. Like, you stuff happens. Like he just ran into some trouble with injury luck. But and then even in the World Series, which is, I mean, among the last moments he had on a mound, honestly, like that was vintage Strasburg. And he came away, won a World Series, won the MVP of the whole thing. And that too, every year in the postseason, the guy was nails. Like every time he was on the mound, he was of that era. He was easily one of the best postseason pitchers in the majors. There were a lot of moments with him. It's a shame the way it ended, but there are a ton of positives to look back on in his career. With Doolittle as well, I know he wasn't with the Nats as long. It feels almost a little funny that they keep bringing him back every year on a minor league deal, something like that, make him potentially their closer and a clubhouse guy, whatever you want to view it as. He had, even with the Nats though, from like 2017 to 19. I mean, he was among the best closers in the majors. When healthy, because he did even then have some injury issues as well. He even in 19, I remember around, I want to say it was like in August, got hurt, came back, was close enough to himself in the postseason that it was effective, but it kind of wasn't the same. That kind of stinks too. Like, you would have loved to have seen him be true Doolittle in the postseason, just so on a national stage everyone would see it. But I mean, we as Nats fans saw it throughout the year and the couple years before that. The dude was, again, like, he was one of the best closers in the majors. He doesn't have like the longevity with the Nats that a Strasburg does, obviously. But even with him, like, just those years there, from like 17 to 19, where I mean, he was reliable every time he stepped out there. And I mean, you look at it now, you look at teams throughout the years, really good teams that just, they can't get those last three outs for whatever reason, because they don't have that type of closer. Doolittle was that guy. And I mean, even just the things he does off the field, that just the dude has a bright mind, an active mind. He's got his head in the right place, which is something that's really nice to see too. You know that even though he has to step away now and he might not have wanted to, he's going to do something with his life after baseball, or he can stay in baseball if he wants to. But he'll make a difference in the community if that's the route he wants to go. And I think that is that's not something we talk about with baseball players all the time, but I do think that is something that's it's neat to see as well. And having been a Virginia guy too, like he's kind of he is this area. He'll make a difference here too, which again I think is a really cool thing.
Yeah, ditto on everything you said about Strasburg. I mean, his debut is, might be the most really hyped start regular season game, especially not even Nationals fans, but just in general, really in recent MLB history. And then yeah, everything you said about Sean Doolittle. I mean, him and Daniel Hudson, that setup closer duo was just unbelievable during that 2019 run. And like you mentioned, for all the stuff he stood for off the field, he's probably one of my favorite Nationals players ever. So definitely sad to see them both retired, but they both contributed to that special 2019 World Series championship team. So that's definitely for sure. Well, that's a great discussion on the Nationals, Stephen, we'll see what they do in 2024, but I think given the expectations, how they overperformed this year, 71 and 91, I think there's a lot to look forward to come 2024. So we can definitely say that for sure. Well, we are 40 minutes into this podcast, and we are now getting to the postseason. That's going to be so exciting, like I talked about. Postseason starts on Tuesday, October 3rd. Remember that with the wild card round, it's now a best of three, which I love. More games. Not that the one and done wasn't great and dramatic. We all know the Nats benefited from the one and done victory over the Brewers in 2019, but I think just for more games, and also just for the fact that after 162 games, it would suck to see your season go down the drain in a one and done situation. At least best 2 out of 3, that a team that advances out of that situation, that they really deserved it. I did want to say, Steven, before we get to the bracket, I think it's so cool that we have so many new playoff teams. I mean, some of these teams haven't been in the playoffs in a while. The Orioles, first time since 2016 for them. Twins, first time since 2020. Rangers, first time since 2016, although they did lose the tiebreaker over the Astros. They both had identical records, but the Astros had a tiebreaker. So Houston wins the division. Brewers, first time since 2021. Marlins, first time since 2020. And the D-backs, first time since 2017. So I just think, you have your dominant teams like the Braves and Dodgers, but you have these new teams in there that also haven't won in a while. So I think that's great to see. So you look at these MLB playoffs. We'll first start with the wild card round. We'll start with the Rays and Rangers. I think this is maybe the best matchup of the wild card round. When you think about the Rangers, how dominant they were in the regular season, the Rays have kind of been in the playoff mix the last couple of years. What do you think about as you look at this series, and who do you have advancing to the division series?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a really interesting series. Um, something I think that might actually make it a little more interesting, or more competitive, I guess I should say, is that the Rays starting pitchers quietly down the stretch haven't quite been themselves. And I think that's, I mean, obviously you go up against a lineup like Texas. I think that there's a chance that things get a little sideways and the Rangers kind of run away with this thing. It's a pretty loaded lineup. You even think about the All-Star game. I don't even remember how many All-Stars it was that had it. It felt
Four
like
All-Stars.
practically everybody. So that's a really strong lineup. I think what it probably comes down to for me is I don't quite believe in Texas's pitching enough. I don't think, and the Rays they've been there, done that enough times that I feel like it goes the distance 3 games. I think, but I think that the Rays end up having just enough. I think the pitching, even though, like I said, it's struggled a little bit down the stretch, I think there's enough there. I think they bounce back, and I think that the Rays pull out the series win.
Rays are missing Shane McClanahan, though, their ace, so that'll be a key absence in this series. I'm going with the Rangers. Like you talked about, I think they've got the four All Stars. that they have Simeon and the crew. I think that their bats will come alive in the postseason. Again, the Rays are missing McClanahan, and then also I think Bruce Bochy. I mean, that's an underrated kind of move that went under the radar. I feel like during the offseason because managers typically, unless they're well known, don't get as much of the hype. But the fact that they got this guy out of retirement, he's a 3-time World Series champion with the Giants. I think having that guy who's kind of been there, done that in the postseason will help calm down the clubhouse. So I'm actually going to go the other way. I'm going with the Rangers over the Rays here in that first wild card matchup. So we already disagree there. Steven's going with the Rays. I'm going with the Rangers. We'll now go to the Twins versus Blue Jays. Twins were probably in the weakest division in baseball. I mean, they won the division with 82 wins, so not that much more than the Nats. It shows, as you were saying, how much of a difference it makes in the division that you're in. The Blue Jays, on the other hand, they've been in the postseason mix the last couple of years. They've got a really one of the top stars in the game, Vlad Guerrero Jr. You know that Toronto fan base is always going to be excited come the postseason. So, what do you think about this matchup? Who do you have advancing to the division series?
I think if the Twins were healthier, this could be a better series. It seems like all their good hitters. I mean, right now are hurt. Whether it's Buxton, Correa, like everybody. Like you said, Toronto's kind of been in this mix enough. They've got some solid pitching at the top of the rotation as well. Kevin Gausman's been pitching really well these last few years. Like you said, Vlad Guerrero. You could name off a bunch of guys there. George Springer is the guy that always shows up in the postseason as well. I think Toronto has to be the pick for me. I just don't. Like you said too, the Twins were in a weak division. That alone helped them make it to the playoffs, and they're just not really even close to full strength right now. So for me, it's got to be Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, you think about what the Rays have 96, 97 wins. They're a wild card, but the Twins, who won the division, gets a host home field advantage in the wild card round. So that kind of shows you again how much the divisions can play a factor. I agree with you. I'm going with the Blue Jays. I just think their lineup, we don't talk about it enough. Bo Bichetti, Dalton Varsho, Vlad Guerrero Jr., Matt Chapman. You add the veteran in the postseason, George Springer. I think that this could be a sneaky team potentially as we move further in the playoffs. So I'm going with Toronto as well. So we both agree with the Blue Jays in that matchup. We move next to two teams we know well in the NL East, the Phillies and the Marlins. The Phillies, of course, a year ago made the World Series under Rob Thompson, who was named the interim manager that same year. They've got the veterans on their lineup, guys who have been tested in the playoffs. Then you got the Marlins. Like I mentioned it, haven't been to the postseason a couple of years. Arias, the 2-time defending batting champion, he's going to be ready to play. But you look at this matchup. I was looking at the odds makers, Steven. Phillies were actually a -215 series favorite, so that shows you what even Vegas thinks. Seems like Philly is a pretty solid favorite as you go into this series. Do you agree with them? Do they make it back to the division series?
Yeah, I think I agree. The Marlins, to me, there's kind of one of those teams. They got hot enough to get to the playoffs and all of that. If they had, I mean, if Sandy Alcantara was healthy for one, but also if he was even pitching like himself, he kind of struggled all year. It's really bizarre to me. I just, and they don't have Yuri Perez either. They're one of those teams that I feel like kind of has to rely on pitching because their lineup isn't all that great relative to other playoff teams, and they don't even really have their pitching right now. I certainly don't feel great about the Phillies pitching. You got Zach Wheeler and not a whole lot else, but just the lineup they have. I mean, whether it's Bryce Harper, Trey Turner's really hot right now. Kyle Schwarber's a postseason player. Run down the list. That lineup's going to be too strong, I think, for the Marlins to really keep up. So yeah, I'll go with Philly.
I agree with you. I'm going with the Phillies. Keep in mind too, I mean, the Cubs imploded the last week of the season. They lost like 4 or 5 games in a row, allowed the Marlins to catch up and overtake them. So if not for that, Marlins might not even be in the playoffs. So I agree with you. I just think talent perspective, Philly is superior. So I'm going with Philadelphia to advance to the division series as well. So in the final wild card matchup, we have I think maybe of the four matchups, kind of two teams where, yeah, I think maybe some of the population across the country may not know as well, being from two smaller markets. You got Milwaukee and the Phoenix Diamondbacks, Arizona Diamondbacks. The Brewers have been in the playoffs a couple times the last couple of years. You remember they made the NLCS back in 2018. Christian Yelich used to be kind of one of those guys who was viewed as one of the top players in the game. And of course, you've got the D-backs who really surprised in the NL West. It wasn't the Padres that ended up being that second team after the Dodgers. It was the D-backs. And really, even at the All-Star break, if I'm not mistaken, Arizona was up 2 games or so on the Dodgers, and then LA just kind of flipped the switch. So you look at Milwaukee and Arizona, who do you have advancing to the division series?
I think I saw Brandon Woodruff's not going to be available for the Brewers. And to me, I feel like that's kind of the difference. I feel like they're, in a lot of ways, they're relatively similar teams. I think they have a couple really solid starting pitchers. The lineups are fine, nothing spectacular. Like I think that the makeup of the teams is pretty similar. The difference to me is, one, that there's no Woodruff, and two, I kind of, Corbin Carroll just feels like one of those guys to me that, like, he's so young and talented. He's here. He doesn't even he's not even going to feel the pressure. Like he's just one of those guys, kind of like an Acuna. I feel similarly to. We'll get to that. Yeah, I feel like I just feel like Corbin Carroll's gonna have a big series. And I think had the Brewers been at full strength in their pitching staff, that might be enough, because it is a really solid 1-2-3 when they're there, plus a Devin Williams as their closer as well. But not at full strength. You talked about Yelich. Yelich hasn't been that type of hitter for 2-3 years now. Give me Arizona.
I agree with you, actually. I'm going with Arizona. You mentioned it, Corbin Carroll, one of the great young players in the game. Zach Allen, I think, he's underrated in terms of what he's been able to do, put on the resume last couple of years. You've got the veterans like Evan Longoria and Ketel Marte. I think he's been a really underrated player in the big leagues. So I think I'm going with you. I think Arizona advances to the division series. So you look at that. We only disagreed on Rangers and Rays, if I'm not mistaken. I had the Rangers, you had the Rays, but we both agreed that the Blue Jays, Phillies, and the D-backs would advance to the division series. So we'll see what happens again, though. And I can't remember off the top of my head, Stephen, what your preseason predictions were, but I was 0 for 8 in picking the divisions. I picked every division wrong. I think I had like maybe 3 or 4 teams correct, because I had a couple of the wild cards correct in both leagues. So for the record, that shows you how much I know. But we both seem to agree on 3 out of the 4 teams advancing to the wild card round. So given that, and again, you'll have to help me keep track here. So I believe I would have in the AL the Rangers taking on the Orioles, and you would have the Orioles and the Rays. So I'll go to you first. Orioles, Rays, the AL East division matchup. Who would you have advancing?
Yeah, again, you talked about it. It's a really good point that the Rays won't have a guy like Shane McClanahan. That to me, they have him. They could go a long way. They don't. I mean, the Orioles, we talked about it. They're a young team. They're up and coming, but they're kind of they arrived way quicker than anyone thought, and they're really good. Like I don't. Like I get that, like their starting pitching is, I mean, if they pitched well, they don't necessarily have the postseason experience, but they pitched well. I think that, at least for a series, I think that can keep up. And I think that lineup, again, Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, Cedric Mullins, just all of them. It's just a really, there aren't necessarily spectacular hitters, but it's just really deep. That's, I mean, that's a lot to handle. I'm a little on the fence just because they won't have a Felix Batista. I think that guy is locked down in the 9th inning. But that said, I think the Orioles have enough. They come away with win this series.
I have and by the way, I did watch that Orioles Rays series at the end of the season, where it was like, I think it was like a 4-game series in Baltimore, where the Rays had a chance to even overtake the Orioles, and who knows, this field could be a lot different. And they won the first 2 games, but the Orioles responded, were able to win the last 2 games, and really never look back, win the division from there. The Nats, by the way, were terrible against the Orioles. I think they've lost like 7 straight against the Orioles or something. So that's another story for another day. But I have the Orioles and the Rangers. I'm going to go with the Orioles. I agree with you. I just think their young roster is exciting, and they're going to have a lot of energy to be in the postseason. That Baltimore fan base is really going to feed them. I mean, Adley Rutschman, Ryan Mountcastle, Sid Mullins. He's got to have a lot of confidence having played in the World Baseball Classic. Gunnar Henderson, you mentioned they did lose Bautista to Tommy John surgery. He'll be out 24 season as well. But I just think if you can set up the pitching with the runs, I think in the playoffs, not that you don't need a good closer, but I think that if you'd rather lose something, I think back into the bullpen compared to the lineup and the rotation is probably what you'd rather take a hit with. So I agree with you. We both have the Orioles advancing to the ALCS. In the other ALDS matchup, we have the Astros and the Blue Jays. I mean, what a matchup of lineups this would be when you think about the Astros. They've got Yordan Alvarez, Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, Kyle Tucker, Jose Abreu, and then pitching-wise, they've got Framber Valdez, one of the best pitchers in the game. Justin Verlander was traded back, so it's nice to have his veteran presence back on that pitching staff. Astros, Blue Jays, who do you have advancing to the championship series?
Yeah, I think you kind of just said all the reasons why I'm going to go Astros. that lineup, as it always is stacked. The idea of Sprinter coming back against the Astros is interesting, and I think the Blue Jays will put up a fight. I do. Whether it's Sprinter, Guerrero, Bo Bichette, they've got a lineup of their own. I just think at the end of the day, the Astros lineup's a little better, and you got a rotation led by Framber Valdez, Justin Verlander. I think that's going to end up being too much for Toronto to handle. So I'll go Astros.
I don't think there's much to disagree with you there. I'm going with the Astros. By the way, I think as impressive as a streak that there currently is in sports, I think the Astros have made 5 straight championship series, so it would be number 6 if they did. I think considering all they've gone through with the cheating scandal and having to, obviously fire AJ Hinch, bring in Dusty Baker, I think that is about as impressive as we've seen in sports, certainly in recent history. So I agree with you. I am going with Houston. So we both agree that the Orioles and the Astros will meet in the championship series. We look now to the NL side, Dodgers and D-backs. The Dodgers really the one team we haven't talked about, but I don't know what else there is to talk about. They're a great team. I mean, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman traded back for JD Martinez, Kike Hernandez as well. Lance Lynn getting traded from the White Sox. I think that's one of the underrated moves of the whole season. I mean, I'm sure you've seen videos of Lance Lynn making Mike Trout look like a terrible hitter on John Boy. So when he's on, I mean, he is a really good pitcher. So they add him into that rotation with Clayton Kershaw, the veteran. Maybe his last run. We'll see what happens with that. We both have Dodgers and D-backs. Who would you have advancing in this series to the championship series?
I will start by saying that I kind of do feel better about the D-backs pitching. Aside from Kershaw, the Dodgers, you brought up Lance Lynn, and Lance Lynn has its moments. It's been a little shaky this year. And after that, there's not a ton I feel great about. Like, they don't have Walker Buehler. They haven't had Dustin May basically all year. So I think they're gettable this year. I don't feel like the D-backs are the team though. You talked about it, that lineup: Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, JD Martinez, Max Muncy when he gets going, Will Smith. I mean, top to bottom, it's a lot like Houston. Like, I don't know what you do. As much as I like the D-backs, I think they have a really interesting, I don't want to say scrappy team because that's reserved for the Nats, but it does kind of have that feel. I think the Dodgers there's too much there. Kershaw at a minimum that blocks them a game, and even though the pitch in after that's a little shaky, I think that they've got enough in the lineup there that they'll come out on top.
I will say, though, that the division series is best of 5, so it's one less game you have to win. So if you're a team like the D-backs, who would be probably a pretty big underdog going into that series, you win one game, all of a sudden the pressure kind of starts to shift because it's a best of 5. You only need 3 to win instead of 4 in a best of 7. But I'm going to agree with you. I'm going on the Dodgers. I think that they'll be motivated because remember last year they were a huge favorite against the Padres and got upset by a team that had 87 wins compared to when they had 111 wins last year. So I agree with you. I'm going with the Dodgers to advance to the NLCS. And then I think you'll agree with this, Steven. Probably the matchup that everyone wants to see happen because I think it would be the best NLDS potential matchup of the ones that we've talked about here. Phillies and Braves. We both have that happening. Remember last year, the Phillies were an underdog going into that series against the Braves in the NLDS, end up winning that series in 4 games and start going to the World Series. So, start on rather that run to the World Series. So, man, this would be quite the matchup. Philly and Atlanta. Who would you have making to the championship series?
Yeah, I know the records don't necessarily align, but it does feel pretty even to me. In a lot of ways. Like they're both they're both kind of led by one when he's on really dominant starting pitcher. The lineups are similarly dangerous. Like it's and obviously, like you said, like they're just two electric teams, really. Like I know we would both agree that as Nats fans, we kind of can't stand either one of those teams. But fact of the matter is they're really exciting teams. They have strong fan bases behind them, and I mean it'll be an exciting series. I would say it's funny. It's almost a coin flip, even though the records aren't really there. Like they're just really similar teams. I think I would still lean towards the Braves, though. It kind of feels like to me in a series like that, especially where there is a little bit of the Phillies don't have a ton of pitching. So at least in the games where it's maybe not Wheeler, that especially like Acuna, I could see him getting on base, just run all over the place, smack a couple home runs, and that's kind of all the Braves need to win it. So I think that's the route I'll go. I'll take the Braves.
I am picking the Philadelphia Phillies to advance to the NLCS. This might be an obscure reason. I kind of feel like, I mean, I don't know if you agree or disagree. The way that the Braves ended that last regular season game against the Nationals, I mean, you think about it, they were pretty much putting their B team out there. I mean, they had taken out Olsen out the game, taken out Acuna, and they weren't really able to close it out. I mean, I think Brian Snitker would have preferred the Braves to kind of close the regular season on a high note. I think that's going to be a factor. And also, I mean, you think about it, I mean, we've seen it with the Nationals, we saw it with the Phillies last year. A lot of times, if you can win that wild card series, I mean, you kind of get, I think, in more of a rhythm than these teams that have a break, because the Braves will basically have not played for a week when this series starts. Whereas the Phillies, if they can advance to that DS potential matchup, they'll have won at least 2 games to get to that point. So I just think the Phillies have the Braves number. You talk about the bats, Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber. I think their lineup is comparable to the Braves, and so it's just a matter of pitching. And again, in a best of 5 series, you need to win one less game. So I'm going the upset here. I am going with the Phillies. So there you go with that. So we both agree, Steven, in the ALCS, Orioles and Astros would face off. Who do you have advancing to the World Series? Would it be the young upstart Orioles, or are you going to take the Astros to go back and try to have a chance of repeating for a second straight year?
I think the lineups are similar enough, although the Astros kind of have more postseason experience. I think what it really comes down to again is just the top of the rotation, but with Valdez and Verlander. They've been there, done that. In these types of moments, you really have no doubts with guys like that, and with the Orioles, there's enough. Although they had good seasons and they were kind of hot down the stretch, the top of the rotation, that is. I just I just don't believe in it enough. And I think that again, like you know what you're getting with Valdez and Verlander, you know what you're getting with the Astros lineup too. It just I don't. They've yet to really ever be faced in these types of moments, and I don't really think that it starts here. So I'll go Astros.
I'm going with the upset. I'm going with the Orioles. Part of this is because I really don't want there to be a repeat champion. I mean, I think what's been great about baseball is that hasn't been a repeat champion since 2000 when the Yankees had kind of finished off their 4 and 5 year run, late 90s into 2000. And so I'm going with the Orioles. I think if they can get there again, I think the last time they made the LCS was 2014, lost to the Royals. I think honestly, in a lot of ways, I know they'd have home field advantage, but in a lot of ways, I think the Orioles would be the kind of first of all, they probably would be the underdog, But second of all, probably would have less pressure. I mean, people will be like, oh, the Orioles, no one expect them to get this far. The Astros are the team that's trying to repeat. So I think home field advantage, you get 4 games in Baltimore with that raucous crowd. I think the Orioles have what it takes to upset the Astros. So I am picking Baltimore, even though I'm a Nats guy. I'm picking Baltimore to go to the World Series. On the other side, we had different NLCSs, actually. I had Phillies and Dodgers, and you had Dodgers and Braves. Obviously, would be a fantastic matchup either way, but in your matchup, LA and Atlanta, who makes it back to the Fall Classic?
Again, I think it's pretty even. I'd say that I probably, of the starting pitchers, I probably feel best about Kershaw, and of the lineups, I probably feel better about the Braves. And I think that, again, it's kind of, I feel similarly. I question the rest of the pitching staffs enough for both that I think that there. Let me put it this way: there are more days that the Braves will be hitting than there will be that Kershaw is pitching. So that to me kind of is the difference. If like I said, if the Dodgers had, I mean, their full arsenal of pitchers, you get Bueller in there, you get Dustin May in there, I think this is a different story, but they're obviously not in the picture here. So I think that relative weakness, if you will, for the Dodgers in the rotation compared to maybe past years, I think that's enough for me to give Acuna and the Braves out there the advantage and get back to the World Series.
So Steven is picking the Braves to go to the World Series. He'd have Braves and Astros in his matchup. I have the Phillies and the Dodgers, and I'm gonna pick the Philadelphia Phillies to advance to back to the World Series. I think, like we talked about it, the lineups are the Dodgers probably have a better lineup, but the Phillies' lineup is no joke. I think the pitching is about the same, and I just think, again, Philly kind of has more house money to play for. I mean, the Dodgers pretty much every year under Dave Roberts have been the favorites to go far in the playoffs. I think Phillies play with house money. In Philly, I mean, that's one of the best sports fan base, not just baseball, but best sports fan bases in the country. They're going to be a raucous crowd. I am picking the Phillies to make it back to the World Series. So there you go. We have 2 different matchups. I've got Phillies and Orioles. Steven has the Astros and the Braves. So hopefully between one of those 4 teams, we can be right and one of them will win it all. But who do you have, Steven, winning the World Series? And also give me how many games, and give me a World Series MVP prediction as well.
Okay. Well, so I think at a certain point, the Braves are going to have to face a team that I believe in more than one starting pitcher. It happens now. And I think the lineups are similar enough. And the Astros, again, like they got Valdez, Verlander. You know what you're getting. And I don't think that the Braves can do enough in the games when they're not pitching to make up for that gap. As far as MVP goes, I'll go. I not really off the grid, I guess, because he's been in the spotlight before, but I'm gonna go with Kyle Tucker. That's a guy. I mean, he's just Mr. Consistency. I mean, you've seen him in. Countless situations here. You've seen him for Team USA as well. Out there, he's one of their better hitters on that team as well. Yeah, I just again, he's just consistent, doesn't get phased by anything. I think, yeah, it's just kind of a gut feeling to me. That he's just in every area of the game, just a real good player. I guess I'm kind of saying too, I think Yordan Alvarez will have a good, not great series, and Tucker will kind of be the guy there. But that'll be my pick, and I'll say Astros get the edge over the Braves.
And how many games? 6, 7?
Oh, I think it goes 7. I'll give it 7. I think it is pretty even. I just think at the end of the day that the Astros have one more really good starting pitcher. I think somewhere in the middle of the series, that's what ends up mattering. Like, I think you get Strider and one of those 2 guys in Game 7. But yeah, end of the day, maybe you see something like Verlander or Valdez starts it, and then the other comes in relief, something like that, and that's the difference.
So, Steve, I mean, first of all, you're picking a rematch of 2021 World Series Braves and Astros, and you are picking the Astros to repeat. So I think, you know, even though they're a wild card, I think that's or not a wild card, but they're playing in the wild card round. I think that you know, that's a conventional pick for a lot of people. Can't fault you for that. I've got Phillies and Orioles. That would actually be a rematch of the '83 World Series, which is the last time the Orioles actually won it all. Cal Ripken Jr. was in his early career with Baltimore. Phillies, Orioles, two great fan bases, Philly and Baltimore. I am picking the Philadelphia Phillies to win this World Series. First of all, I think if it would be a nightmare for Nats fans because you have two teams you don't like, which I will get to in a second. But I just think at that point, I like the lineup of the Phillies a little bit more. You've got the veterans. Bryce Harper, he's finally been to the World Series, been to the playoffs numerous times. Kyle Schwarber won a World Series with the Cubs. Trey Turner won a World Series with the Nationals. JT Realmuto is one of the most consistent catchers in the game. I just think at that point, I trust Philly's lineup a little bit more than I trust Baltimore's lineup. So I am going with the Phillies to win it all in 2023. So there you go. Steven is going with the Astros. I am going with the Phillies. And no matter what happens, we'll probably get some picks wrong. I think we can both agree. It's the well, I think baseball is the best postseason. I mean, when you talk about every pitch, you know, just the tension builds up, and I think it'll be interesting to see how the pitch clock actually affects that, in terms of kind of maybe does it increase the tension, does it hurt the tension a bit? But I guess I wanted to ask you, Stephen. Obviously, if you're a Nationals fan, you've got a couple teams here that are rivals of the Nats in the playoffs: the Phillies, the Braves, the Marlins, the Orioles. I guess there's a two-part to that question. A, how would you feel? You know, because we're both from the DMV, we know a lot of Oriole fans. How would you feel about the Orioles winning the World Series? And B, of those teams that I mentioned, is there a team that you would want to win the World Series the least amount? Like, please do not let this team win of those teams I mentioned.
Yeah, I don't really have any hard feelings towards Orioles fans. Some of the I guess um pushback, I guess, on Nats fans, where older Nats fans, where it's like the Orioles will be like, well, you must have been an Orioles fan growing up. Why'd you switch over or whatever? That whole thing gets old. But aside from that, like, good for them. They've again, I in general don't have super hard feelings towards them, and they've also just been down in the dumps for so long that it would be great for them to come out on top here. Even though, I mean, it's kind of weird that you have all those bad years, all of a sudden you pop up once and boom, World Series. Like, that's not how that's supposed to work. But yeah, they, after the years they've had, they kind of deserve it. They haven't even been in that kind of spotlight, like you said, for so long that I wouldn't I wouldn't really feel bad about it or anything. Um, so it's the Braves and the Phillies are the ones that would get under my skin more. Of the two, I would probably say that Philly would probably bother me more. Matter of fact, this year I did go to a Nats game against the Phillies. And I think it was in the, I want to say, eighth inning. I forget how many runs it was. It was off Corey Abbott, I think, that the Phillies just teed off. Like, they're hitting home run after home run after home run. Trey Turner had 2 home runs that inning. And it's like all these Phillies fans around us, they're elated, yelling like crazy. And I'm just like, make it stop. I just can't do this. Philly fans, I can't do it. Yeah, of those teams you mentioned, I guess it would be Philly fans. I'm not huge on the Braves either, but of the two, yeah, it'd be Philly that would drive me the most nuts. Which I mean, you picked them, so you know how I feel about that pick now. But yeah, it'd be the Phillies to me.
I agree with you on both counts. Yeah, I don't really. I mean, look, the Nats and the Orioles, more so Masson. I mean, that's kind of the big question mark in terms of that rivalry. But in terms of on the field, I mean, they only play each other like 6 games a year. It's not really anything to write home about. They're not even. It's not like it's also like the Mets and the Yankees where you're in the same area. I mean, it's just two really same region, but just completely different areas. I've got friends that are Orioles fans, so I would not, if they do well, I think, the way they built themselves up, like you talked about, had to endure and kind of build up their farm system and kind of get to where they are. I think that's a great way to see a team win, especially now when people try, like Steve Cohen, try to pay millions of dollars, even more to try to buy a World Series. The Orioles are kind of building from the ground up. I agree with you. I picked the Phillies to win, but yeah, I mean, even just growing up, all those great Philly teams when the Nats were bad, when they had guys like Ryan Howard and Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley, Cole Hamels, always hated the Phillies the most. And then of course they've got Bryce Harper now as well. But and I've actually also been to one of those Nats Phillies games in Philly, and I remember after the game, believe it or not, Maikel Franco hit a walk-off home run for the Phillies to win that game. And I just remember walking home, kind of walking out of the ballpark, kind of minding my own business, and some guy yells, "Have a nice drive back to DC." So you see the way the Phillies fans are. So definitely a great discussion there on baseball. Really quick, Stephen, before I let you go, it's been a great discussion as always talking baseball with you. Thoughts on the Hokie season? I mean, that's, we can have a whole nother conversation about that. I mean, they did win against Pitt, so now they're 2-3 on the season. But of course, a couple of tough losses. You kind of feel like they could have beaten Purdue. A lot of people probably expecting them to beat Marshall, beat ODU at least this season. But and I'm someone who's seen Brent Pry a lot. I think he's a really nice guy, but sooner or later, and he does better than Fuente in terms of trying to ingratiate himself with the Hokie community. But sooner or later, the wins are going to start kind of. People are going to be like, hey, you got to start winning. It can't just be about you're a great guy. But what do you think about Hokies football so far? What do you think about where they are? And I guess what's kind of the long-term future for them in terms of, Brent Pry? I mean, where is he kind of land in terms of if they don't do well this year, is he on the hot seat? But realistically, I mean, can this team ever get back to at least kind of even being, I hate to say even ACC because the way this thing's going, college football, ACC will dissolve, but at least being relevant, even say bowl eligible, 6, 7, 8 wins, consistently having winning seasons.
Yeah. As far as this season goes, like you were saying, I think, I mean, really every game's been winnable. Just if you look at it on the schedule. Ironically, the one that opening the season you'd probably maybe didn't think was winnable was the Pitt game, and that's the one they win. But along with the ODU game, obviously. Yeah, it's been rough. Like you know as well as I do. I would just say that I think things. I'm cautiously optimistic that things are heading in the right direction with Kyron Drones. One of the things that I did notice in the Pitt game as well was just the play calling. Like I think that Brent Pry, Tyler Bowen offense really it is centered around a mobile quarterback, the RPO game, things like that. Establish the run, and that's how you maybe get some chunk plays in the passing game. Yeah, I think the Grant Wells experiment, having seen kind of how this thing's going with drones, the Grant Wells experiment I think has to be over. And I think it's probably for the better anyway because Drones has more upside. He's got I don't even know what 3 years of eligibility still. That goes a long way as well. Although I mean you can always get a quarterback out of the transfer portal if you need to. But I still think that I mean ideally that's kind of what you want. You have there's more mobility there. I mean he's a good enough passer as well. Fits the system again. It seems like better. And having seen that in the Pitt game work as well as it did, I kind of feel like that's something you can hang your hat on, lean into going forward. Now, obviously, against Florida State, I don't think that's going to fly. But the rest of the ACC, I think I was talking about it with some buddies over the weekend. The ACC schedule, like they're just outside of Florida State. I mean, what games really aren't winnable? Like I wouldn't favor Tech, sure, but I mean, even if you want to talk Syracuse, Louisville, like none of those teams are invincible. Like they're all flawed, and I mean, if Tech can, if the offense can get going more so like it did against Pitt, although Pitt's having a really rough year too, so I wouldn't put too much stock into that. But I mean, it at least looked a lot better. And they had no trouble in that game, which is definitely encouraging. So I mean, you kind of go with what you had there with the offense. The tackling was a lot better too. That's been a hot topic in the amongst the tech fan base and media. Just the run fits have been terrible at times this year. Yeah, just the guys that would gash through 50, 60-yard touchdowns seemingly left and right, like the Rutgers game, or like it's been a mess. But that was a lot better as well. And Pitt can run the ball too, so that's also encouraging in that sense. Um, so I guess, like I said, cautiously optimistic that things are headed the right direction. Um, I I I don't think I don't think bowl eligibility is all that in the picture this year. It's possible, but I would expect you're probably talking more like 4 or 5 wins, which is still an improvement. So I guess that's good. And like you said, I think Brent Pry's doing the right things out on the trail with the fans. I mean, he's a great guy. You can tell that for sure. He understands recruiting better than Fuente did, all of that. So those are positive things. I think um big picture this season from what I've seen, I've more gotten the sense that the issue is probably the rest of the coaching staff. Like whether it's Tyler Bowen, although again the play calling in the Pitt game was a lot better, so maybe that's kind of fixed now. To Chris Marv, who the defensive coordinator, and he's like the linebacker coach too, and the linebackers have struggled. So what's going on there? And then I mean, just kind of across the board, like you kind of wonder why there hasn't been more development up and down the roster, things like that. But like I said, I think that things like recruiting and just fan engagement relations like that, it's all going better. So I'm definitely more willing to sit through the struggles with this coaching staff than I was with Fuente, just because I mean you saw the direction that was going. It was just a mess. So I, I'm I'm I'll wait and see. Like I think things are going the right way. Maybe I'd like to see it for more than one game before I say that with any certainty. Um, as far as kind of the bigger picture of really getting back someone in the mix in the ACC or wherever they end up, being more of an like 7, 8, 9 whatever win team. Um, I think yeah, I mean, it's just so hard to say because they're at where they're at right now. Yeah, they had one good game. I don't want to do the whole overreaction. Well, now everything's fixed. They had one really good game against a team that's often good. So now, I mean, the rebuild is just gotten ramped up that much quicker. Like I don't want to go there necessarily, but um, I mean, I am less pessimistic, I guess, than some fans are about it. Like I don't think Pry's a bad coach. I think maybe there's some changes that you make around the margins, and then if you do well enough in the transfer portal. I will say I think as far as the transfer portal goes, I one thing that does kind of bother me is that like you've seen the offensive line. It's bad. It's real bad. And they really didn't do anything at all in the portal there. Like they knew what they had. They had super young guys that have barely played. Their most experienced guy, they're one of their guards, they moved to center and he hasn't been good at center. And then everything else, like they've barely ever played. And like it's not like they're blue chip prospects. So it's like, what did you really think was gonna happen? Why like and I know that like offensive linemen don't grow on trees in the portal, but like do something. So that did bug me. I think going into next year, that's something that they gotta address. But if they do that, and I think like they've done well enough as far as getting like receivers in the portal. It stinks that Ollie Jennings is hurt, but they did what they needed to do. And their other receivers like Jalen Lane, Daquan Felton, they've looked solid. Um, and I really, outside of the tackling, I don't have any issues with the defense at all. Like the DBs are all really good. The defensive line kind of is what it is. It's not great, not terrible. I think, yeah, I mean, there's a path. There's definitely a path to getting back to where they want to be. It a lot of it honestly just depends on what Kyron Drones is, and we've only seen 2-3 games of it so far, so it's hard to really say. But you can at least see glimpses of whether it's a Hendon Hooker, Gerard Evans, those types of guys that, I mean, they can be physical runners. They're pretty hard to tackle just in general. They can move around outside the pocket, good enough throwers. We'll kind of see that's of all the areas, that's the area that Jones probably needs to develop a little more. But I mean, we'll see. I think step one though was, I hate to say it, but moving on from Grant Wells. So the fact that they've done that, you've at least seen the offense do some things, and if they can at least not be a basement level offense among not only the Power Five but kind of the entire FBS really. They were down really low. But if you can at least be a respectable offense, the pass defense will always be fine if they can figure out the tackling like they seem to against Pitt. I mean, you're a decent enough team, and then from there, it's just a matter of, I mean, they're getting relationships on the recruiting trail better. You can start getting those guys down the 804 and 757 more, which has been a big issue, especially down the stretch in the Fuente regime. You start getting guys like that. I mean, from there, the results will get better. And even if you can start leveraging those Penn State relationships, frankly, like on the recruiting trail, like you start getting the guys more further north, whether it's Northern Virginia, Maryland, even a guy or two in Pennsylvania every once in a while. Although, I mean, that's Penn State territory, so that's hard to do. But it just every once in a while, get one of the better guys up there as well. Like that's that to me. That's I mean, that's how you get on the right path. So I mean, again, it's hard to say just because this year's been a struggle, and they did just have one good game, which is good, but that doesn't mean everything's fixed. But like at the same time, I don't think it's as doom and gloom as a lot of people do. I definitely think there's a path back. It's just kind of like I was saying, kind of start getting the recruiting things right, do a little better in the portal in some of the key areas, especially like the line. And yeah, that's kind of it. I think intangibly, I think Brent Pry has a lot of the characteristics that you need, which is refreshing. But I mean, we'll kind of see. I don't know as far as the ACC goes. As well as I do, the end is near. It's just a matter of that grant of rights that goes another decade plus. Like how I don't know. We'll see where that is. It's the reality is that the ACC is. I mean, it's obviously getting overtaken by the Big Ten and SEC, but I would even say like the Big 12 at this point. Like a lot of those like Pac-12 schools they were getting, plus some of the better Group of Fives. Like I think they at least like they're never going to compete with the Big Ten and SEC, but they're at least doing the right things from like getting the best of the rest, I guess. Whereas the ACC is just kind of standing still, and then at some point you're going to lose a Florida State or a Clemson, and then it's like, what are we doing? Like we're basically a Group of Five conference at that point. So, yeah, I'm not so optimistic on that front, but that's just hard to forecast. Like I don't know. That really just depends on what the bigger conferences want to do, like how far they want to expand, or if at some point teams from the Big 12 and ACC merge some of the better schools there, and then you got something that's decently competitive at least. Like it's hard to say. All you can do is really control on the home front, just like how things are going with Tech specifically. And I think that again, cautiously optimistic that the things that went well in this Pitt game and some of the intangible things that Brent Pry seems to be good at, plus, I mean, some little improvements along the way, nothing too major. and I think that they could get back to closer to where they've been in the past and where Tech fans want them to be.
Stephen, this has been such a pleasure getting to chat with you as always. Seems like a tradition talking about the MLB postseason, recapping the national season, even threw in some hokey football there. Thanks so much for your time, man. It's always a pleasure, and can't wait to do it next time.
Anytime, man. I'm always here for it. I love the tradition we've got going here.
For sure. Well, thank you so much to Stephen Newman, Virginia Tech class of 2018, technical writer, also a sports writer. You can see him on Dulles District as well as the Capital Newsman, for joining me on the latest edition of the Post with BP. Enjoy the MLB postseason, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. See you next time.